Hey guys, this is Joe with the Adapt team, and in this video we are talking about Adapt audio switchers. The first thing I want to show you here is I'm actually stealing a slide from the last video. We're talking about just our programming flow when we're programming any Adapt device. The first thing that we're doing when we're programming any Adapt device is we're defining our hardware in simple windows. So this is how many of each device we have, but it's also things like IP IDs and certain IR ports and COM ports and those types of things. So always step one is to define our hardware, and of course this happens in simple windows. Once all of our hardware is defined and we actually go to compile and load our program, that's when our Adapt file gets generated and we can actually start to configure this system. So for this video, we're focused mostly on this definition or defining our hardware in simple windows, and there's going to be a whole other video on configuring this hardware in System Manager later on. Now, when we go to actually define our hardware, and when we say actually defining our hardware, I really mean two things, or there's pretty much two pieces to this. If you're using a Crestron device, and let's just talk about audio switchers here since that's what this video is about. If you have a Crestron audio switcher, the first thing you need to do is, of course, add that Crestron device to your system in Configure View. That's where you actually specify the exact model number of the hardware you're using and the IP ID to set it at. And if you're not using a Crestron piece, then you're going to want to add your third-party module and get that module kind of set up first thing. After you've kind of added your hardware or your module to your system, you're then going to want to drag in a corresponding Adapt module to represent that device, and then connect our Adapt module to that hardware. You'll see that we have Adapt modules for most Crestron hardware, and in fact most of these modules are capable of something we call auto import, and you'll see me use this in just a second. And then we also have modules that are generic Adapt modules for your third-party switchers, and this is what you're using to connect to your third-party modules. Alright, so we're going to jump over to Simple Windows and actually start to add in some of these devices here. And you can see my boot up module is still good to go from our last video. And really in Simple Windows, what I like to do is I like to start at the top of my devices folder and work my way down. So obviously our first device type here is audio switchers. Now before we get too far along here, it is important to at least identify, yes, there is a Adapt SWAMP 8 expanders module in here already. I'm going to just simply pretend that this doesn't exist, and we're going to come back and talk about this in just a sec. So for now, just imagine that this doesn't exist. So of course the first thing I would want to do for my training residents is of course add my audio switcher hardware. Per the spec that I showed in the previous video, my audio switcher here is a C2N amp 6x100. So I'm going to go ahead and add that hardware first and foremost right here. Now of course this hardware is blank, it's empty. That's what happens when you pull in a new device type. So this is a brand new device in my system, and now what I'm ready to do is pull in the corresponding Adapt module. You see here in my module library, my symbol library, I have my 6x100 Adapt module, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that into my system. When I double click on an Adapt module to open it up, the first signal that will already be selected is init. So it's kind of a muscle memory thing, at least for me, that when I pull in a module, I'll double click to open it up, and I immediately go over to my keyboard and type in init. I'm also going to give this device a 3-digit switcher number. We always recommend you use 3 digits. This will help prevent any mishaps or errors that may be possible if you're using your F9 search and replace key. This 3 digits helps prevent against that. Alright, so I've got my module initted and I've given it a switcher number. Now this module is ready to connect up to my hardware. In this case, if you look to the left of the module name, you see that this icon has some red accent to it compared to some of these other modules. They're just kind of plain gray. This one has these red accents, and what the red means is that this module is capable of being auto imported, and these are the pieces it can be imported to, the 2 flavors of 6x100s obviously. And this is a really nice feature because it'll help us connect to our hardware that much easier. the way I do this auto import is I right click and I drag on this adapt module, and I hold my drag all the way until I'm on my corresponding hardware that I want to import this module onto. And when I release on this hardware, I get this option for import device logic. Simple Windows prompts me for a signal name prefix here. I like to use ASW for audio switcher, and then the same 001 prefix I used just a second ago. And when I hit enter, you'll see that not only has Simple Windows generated these signal names for me, but it has also connected them to their appropriate landing place on my C2NAMP hardware. And so I don't have to worry about manually defining the signals and then manually connecting them to the appropriate location. Simple Windows kind of handles that all for me. And now, because I don't care what sources plug in where or which outputs go to which rooms, I would actually now be done with this 6x100. Since I only care about just defining this hardware, that's exactly what I'm done. And so technically at this point, I'm done. Just to show you how fast that all can be in kind of real time, I'm going to do this all again for us here. I'm going to start by adding another C2NAMP hardware that's empty. I'm going to pull in another adapt module. I'm going to give this one init and 002. This module is going to auto import onto the second switcher. ASW002, same thing. So now my module is connected up and it's complete. One way that I kind of remind myself that I am complete with various adapt modules and I'm ready to move on is I give them a comment. So I'm going to give everything a nice little comment here. All right. So now we can come back to this swamp module that we've been expanding. This swamp module, as the name might imply, is a adapt swamp module with 8 expanders. So this is 72 something zones of audio that are all connected to a swamp with 8 expanders worth of hardware up here. Now you might be saying, well, I've got this red icon, so what do I need this adapt module in my program already? And the answer is really that this auto import functionality does not allow us to import onto these expanders. So typically, if I was starting from scratch and I was programming a swamp with 8 expanders, it would be a very manual and time-consuming and error-prone process to connect signals from my adapt module for all of these various expanders and connect them to their appropriate locations on my swamp hardware. And so instead, what we've done is we've given you a swamp with 8 expanders that has everything connected up perfectly fine, and you essentially get to use, maybe you're using a swamp with 8 expanders and you're already done, or maybe you're using a swamp with less expanders. Maybe let's say you're using a swamp with 5 expanders. All I need to do is just copy from my old module onto this new swamp 5 expanders module. It's going to complain to me because of course there's some signals that don't exist for swamp expanders 6, 7, and 8, but now this module is happy, and then all I need to go in and do is delete essentially expanders 8, 7, and 6, and now I have a swamp 5 expanders module connected to a swamp with 5 expanders hardware. And so we've really provided this swamp 8 expanders module for you as a convenience for if you're doing any size swamp system with any number of expanders. We think that that will save you some time right there. Now, in my system, in this training residence, so to speak, obviously my audio switchers are C2NAMP, so I can actually just straight up delete this swamp module altogether, and it will, of course, be ready for me in my next program because it's already in that starting template that I'm going to start with. I think that that will just about do it for our video on audio switchers. Like I said, we'll be talking about configuring audio switchers in a system manager, AV configuration video a little bit later on. And so for now, I'll call it right there. And in our next video, we will be talking about adapt video switchers. Hope to see you there. Thanks.